We are privileged today to have a very senior serving officer with the Australian Regular Army, good friend and colleague of mine, Brigadier Mark Ascough. How are you, Mark?
Very well, Ben. Thanks very much to you and Eric for reaching out and asking me to be part of your podcast.
And prior to going on, Mark, we talked about the word humbling, and I must admit this is rather humbling for me because as a fellow graduate on the same day, which I think was the 10th of December 1996, we would have been about 20 metres away from each other throwing our hats in the air. I'm now talking to a brigade commander who, back in my day as a young lieutenant, I looked at brigade commanders as absolute gods. So it is a privilege for me, Mark, I must admit. But speaking of which, what is a brigade commander, et cetera, et cetera? I'm going to give a brief intro to you, Mark, and let our listeners know who and why you're here. So Brigadier Mark Ascough was commissioned into the Australian Intelligence Corps, as I mentioned, on the same day that I graduated from the Royal Military College in 1996. Mark was also a graduate of the Australian Defence Force Academy. And with his appointments, he was appointed to the Australian Intelligence Corps, and his first appointment to the 1st Intelligence Battalion and 51st Battalion Far North Queensland Regiment. He was later on the staff of the 1st Brigade, the Army Headquarters Forces Command, and he's also held command at all ranks from Lieutenant through to Lieutenant Colonel, including the Chief Instructor and CO of the Royal Military College, Mark. So again, someone I looked at back in my day at Duntroon as an absolute god. And in 2019, Mark took command of the 6th Brigade here in Brisbane. Did I miss anything, Mark, other than a number of overseas deployments?
No, look, that's a pretty good summary of the last 20-something years of service, and it's certainly been a wide and varied and not a journey that I ever anticipated making when I stepped on the bus on the 25th of January 1993 to start my training and education at the Australian Defence Force Academy, thinking that I might do a year of study and get some credit points up before coming back to Queensland and having settled on which degree I might study at either Queensland or in New South Wales. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey and not one that I ever anticipated making.
Well, look, that's probably a pretty good segue, Mark, to our first question, and thinking about not only your appointments, both after your ADFA and RMC days, but equally your experiences. So tell us the beginning of your leadership pathway, even thinking before your times at ADFA.
Yeah, look, I think whilst I probably didn't think of it as a leadership pathway, like many of your previous guests, the values and the influence of my home life, my parents and my extended family was quite profound. I was very fortunate for a period of time to have my great uncle live with us, with my mum and dad and my brother and sister and I. He had effectively raised my mum and her siblings alongside her mum after his brother and my mum's dad passed away when she was somewhere around 11 or 12 years of age. And my great uncle, Bob Morris, he and his brother Jeff, brothers, country boys from Victoria, about 8 of them from memory. But those two had teed up, joined the war together in 1939, thought they were joining the Navy, found themselves signed up to the 2nd AIF and served in all 3 theatres of war, Middle East, Crete and the Pacific during World War II. And they came home and took up a bunch of different jobs and opportunities, used through the veterans scheme. And they were, jack of all trades, masters of none. Those guys that really just had to go to see how it might go. And often it didn't go very far, unfortunately. And my mum had moved around a fair bit and her dad passed away, like I said, when she was relatively young, and Uncle Bob took over running the family alongside her mum, as sort of co-parents, independent people, but sacrificed his life, to raise his own family, to raise his nephews and nieces. And he lived with us for a number of years, and it was really him and mum and dad that really gave us some sense of accountability and responsibility as kids. And, we all did the normal kid things and pushed boundaries and, acted up, but we always knew what was right. Even when we didn't do it, we knew what it was. It was held to account if caught out. And that today still resonates pretty strongly with me. The example that he set about, selflessness and humility and sacrifice and being kind to others, again, didn't necessarily always recognize it as a young man and an adolescent, but always knew just how much he'd given to raise my mum and my uncles. It had a big impact. Even though he passed away when I was relatively young, he still features strongly, as does my parents, both my mum and dad, and the role, I think probably what they learnt from him as young adults, as young parents when he was living with us. And again, they probably don't recognise that necessarily or don't talk about it that much, but I think he probably had a bit of an influence on them as well as they were raising, they were both young parents. My dad was in his mid-20s when he had me, and mum was, likewise also relatively young. So yeah, I think that's where my leadership pathway started, to be honest. And to me, leadership's about understanding what right is and doing the right thing for the right reasons for others. It's very much that service and sacrifice basis. I was lucky to go to school, a range of great schools in primary school and high school that equally reinforce those values. I've listened to a number of podcasts over the last couple of years, listening to people talk about their experiences, and they talk about the role sport played. Well, definitely team sport played a role for me in giving me confidence in my physical abilities. I don't know if you recall, Ben, but certainly I had certain physical prowess, but I certainly wasn't a runner, and the Army valued runners. I could sprint fast, a couple of 100 metres, but after about 200 metres, that was about me done. And so joining the Army,
I remember you're pretty swift. Were you a winger in the rugby team, or?
Yeah, I could play on the wing, but if you wanted me to run 5K, it was a different kettle of fish, and it's something that I had to learn. And sport helped me learn that it was physically possible to do those things and endure a bit of pain and suffering along the way and build resilience. But equally, I think what school gave to me was, again, a sense of service. So I was lucky to go to a school that valued service and imposed it in a way, I suppose, because, for adolescent men and women, the idea of serving anyone but yourself is, not cognitively ingrained in us. So the school sort of imposed it by living it, giving us opportunities to serve others. And I think that was really important. And I reflect back on it and appreciate those opportunities, because you got to meet interesting people, you got to go and do amazing things with other organisations in the community, and just get a sense of why that mattered, because we were pretty fortunate, middle class white Australians going to a good school in Brisbane, but there was plenty of our fellow citizens that weren't as fortunate, and we got a chance to at least contribute to their well-being. So yeah, I suppose that's the pre-military exposure, both from a family and school-based perspective.
I might jump in quickly, Eric, if I can.
Yep, you go.
Interested in your perspective, Mark, on the influence of say, senior NCOs early in your career. You had your first role at 51 Far North Queensland Regiment. I assume that was in more of an infantry platoon commander role. So I often talk about a wonderful relationship I had with my troop sergeant in my first appointment, and I think he moulded me and supported me enormously. So just drawing on a few memories back there. So have you got any sort of descriptions around senior NCOs or other people around you that assisted you with your development as a military officer?
I'd like to say that my first real growing experience with my senior NCOs was a positive one, but unfortunately it was the opposite. It was learning about perhaps what right didn't look like. And that's just as equally powerful as having positive role models as well. And, Weipa and Cape York is a long way away from anywhere. It was about a 12-hour drive on a good day from Cairns, and only during the dry season. During the wet, it was a fly or sail around the Cape because the road closed in those days. Very small team up in Weipa arrived out of Singleton, out of the infantry RBC, into the heart of the wet season in Weipa. And I was met by my officer commanding, who was a 6'5" stereotypical infantry giant, this big personality, big guy, and welcome to Weipa, mate. Good luck. You're on a patrol in 10 days. And I had a brand new company sergeant major. So that was the team. We had a CQ as well, a company quartermaster sergeant, infantry quartermaster, but that was the four-person regular Army team in Weipa. So the OC, myself as a Company 2IC, patrol commander, and every other extra regimental role that needed to be done. Company sergeant major, a warrant officer class 2, and a CQ sergeant. We did get a clerk later in the year from memory, a corporal clerk. But unfortunately, my first CSM didn't adjust to the culture required of the Far North Queensland Regiment and an RFSU, or Regional Force Surveillance Unit. It's a remote locality, as I mentioned, and it works in effectively a foreign culture. Our majority of our soldiers were Indigenous. There's 6 or 7 communities on Cape York in our area of operations that we lived and worked in. In my second year there, I think I lived in each of those communities for at least a month at a time, and come back to Weipa, change vehicles, and go again. And that required a personality, I think, that could adjust to those cultures. And some of our senior NCOs came from, a regimental background and needed to have that framework and that strength of the regiment to give them the sense of understanding and purpose. And unfortunately, my senior NCO that I first integrated didn't have that. And, I thought all warrant officers were gods. Coming from RMC, the quality of the senior NCOs that we had as instructors, the quality of the instructors at the School of Infantry during my regimental officer basic course, you thought that if what a sergeant and a warrant officer advised you had to be right. There was no way that they could be giving you bad advice. And unfortunately, that wasn't the case. And as a junior officer, I soon found myself in front of the CO and the OC being asked some fairly tricky questions, to which I realised that I'd been, effectively inadvertently brought into a, bad decision-making that had been made by my senior NCO at the time, and I'd become complicit in that because I hadn't actively thought. I'd allowed just to take the advice of that senior NCO or warrant officer and act without consciously thinking about what it was we were undertaking. And it wasn't, illegal or immoral, but it certainly wasn't the right thing that we'd done. I learnt a very hard and painful lesson initially up front to be more active in my thinking and not so accepting in the advice that I might receive from, in this case, my senior NCOs, but also from anyone else. I think the lesson I got from the CO and the OC was, mate, you're an officer, engage your brain and trust your judgment. If it doesn't feel right, smell right, taste right, then it probably isn't right. If you're not sure, ask. And that was a really good lesson. And to their credit, though, they didn't have a zero mistakes policy. You're dead and dusted. It was hey, you've been here 6 weeks. You're in a almost a foreign country. We accept that you need to learn. Show us that you can learn from this, grow from this. And to their credit, they gave me those opportunities, and I certainly didn't make the same mistake twice.
That's actually a great story, Eric. In my view, I think not only in our development as leaders, you learn what to do and who to mirror. Equally, you learn what not to do. And I think Mark's given us a great example there.
Yeah, just a couple of follow-ups if I can, Mark. Thank you for sharing that. And it's something that's come up in these podcasts and others that I listen to around the leadership topic, that when you're necessarily young or new to a particular industry, or in your case, the military, that you take some things as understood and you're hoping that the people around you have got your best interests at heart when they're doing what they're doing. Now, I'm not saying you may have gotten bad advice maliciously, but I think experience is a great teacher and makes you a better leader into the future. And so having the occasional stuff up actually can make you better at what you're doing, because if you hadn't learned that lesson early, you don't want to have that happen as you become more senior, because the expectations start to rise. And from previous podcasts with people that are no longer serving but are now in the civilian sector as well, that takes on a whole different meaning, because I think that the cultures in which you work expect excellence, but based on some common sense things. And I think when you're young, you can escape with a wrap around the knuckles because you're trying to do your best. But I think the world of the greys and not the blacks and whites start to become more apparent, definitely from these podcasts around people that have been in the military, that experience is a very good thing, and it's something that you need to learn from very quickly to be able to progress. Does that hit home for you, Mark?
Oh, absolutely. I don't think anyone makes the right decisions all of the time at the right time, and so if you can't be in an organisation or an environment where you can make not the best decision and be able to learn from it and grow from it, then that's really unfortunate, because that's the only way you can learn. You learn more from the wrong decision or the not the best decision than you do from always making the right decisions. Because if you're for whatever reason able to make always the best decision, the right decision, it's very hard to learn, because things happen as anticipated by making that good decision. Whereas if you don't make the right decision or the best decision, then unanticipated outcomes occur, and you've got to learn from those, and you've got to adapt and grow. That's where you build your professional experience, as you talk about, and your expertise, because it's that ability to adapt and grow is what organisations require of you, every day. And so I think, the military absolutely allows you to make mistakes, despite, the perception, I think, sometimes of it, being this zero mistake culture and this zero mistake environment because of the consequences. But there are some mistakes that obviously, and in some environments, that you always have to be held accountable for your decisions and actions. And I think that's the key thing as well, is understanding that with responsibility and with the access to resources comes accountabilities. And that equation means that you have to be held accountable for, even when your decisions aren't the best ones, but you need to learn from them, grow from it. And, in some cases, obviously, there will be a negative consequence from it as well, especially when we're dealing with human lives. And that's right and appropriate. But that's why we train. The military has the virtue and the luxury of having, time to train, trying to learn. And that's the time to make mistakes, so that we have the minimal amount of mistakes when we deploy and go on operations, because we've actually hopefully run through as many different scenarios and permutations of operational environments, and we've given our people the chance to improve constantly and learn from how to do things better, differently, and be able to adapt to changing circumstances as they are confronted with them.
This story you relayed was almost 3 decades ago, and it still seems to be fresh in your mind. What was it that kept it fresh in your mind as a young emerging leader in the military? Was it because you think, and you can take this apart as you like, but was it because you made the mistake and it was something you should have been more aware of, or was it that after there was a consequence, you started looking back at where your own deficits and trying to get that better decision didn't come to the fore? And again, this is not a critique of what you did. It's more this thing obviously stayed fresh in your mind. So what was it in that process that kept that front and center? Because it's a great story to tell new and up and emerging leaders that it's okay to make a mistake, but you need to be able to look back and see where the mistake, what were the elements of it, and how can you improve your own practice?
I think it's remained fresh and poignant and relevant to me for a couple of reasons. Firstly, probably draws on what Ben referred to with the positive relationship and the positive experience of being able to learn from your senior NCOs. As a junior officer, there's a reason why you get paired effectively with a senior non-commissioned officer, a sergeant or a warrant officer, and you become a command team together. And that individual, that senior soldier, has significantly more experience that you referred to, Eric, that experience to draw upon to help you make decisions, whilst you have potentially a fresh perspective, and you also have you come in with that ability to be a little bit separate from the rest of the team, because often the senior NCO has come from that team or come from a like team. And so you bring complement. So when you don't have that senior NCO that you can draw from experience, or you draw experience from, but it ends up being, wrong, that's a powerful moment for a junior officer, because they realise then that one, the experience and the examples that they've had shown to them during their officer training, which you have a lot to do with senior non-commissioned officers, sergeants and warrants officers during your officer training, and they set standards that you can only aspire to try and achieve in their military professional skills. And you look at them and go, how am I ever going to achieve that? How can I be even close to being as proficient and professional as they are? And so when you get out in the workplace, I guess you have a bit of an assumption that that's what all your senior NCOs and your warrants are going to be like. And so you place your trust, and we build teams designed to place your trust in those individuals to give you advice as junior officers. So when it doesn't go right, it's a fairly poignant moment for a junior officer, because all of a sudden they realise they need to be more active. I realised I needed to be more active in my own thinking and judgment, and not just rely upon the experience of my 20-year senior NCO. That's different to what you'd hope you have in those first few months of your initial employment. And I think the other reason it's fresh in my mind is because I remember how my command team above me reacted, in that they held me to account, but they didn't crucify me and say, well, that's the end of your career 3 months in. We need to learn from this. You need to learn from this, but we want to give you the opportunity to learn from this, and we're not going to rule a line under you and say, well, you're a lost cause. They said, no, we understand that this is a new environment, a new experience, and we need to give you the time and space and the opportunity to learn, and show us that you can learn from these types of mistakes. And that to me was really powerful and important, because it could have been over before it began if they hadn't taken that approach.
Yeah, appreciate that, Mark. Thank you for that, mate.
Mark, your biography is littered with operational deployments in, every corner of the globe. So I assume you've had some significant dealings, even in your current role, with civilian agencies. So I'm going to bend our normal question for our ex-military, now commercial leaders. So we're talking to a senior army officer still. So what are your views on military leadership versus those civilian senior leaders you've dealt with, and what sort of skills they bring to the fore? And let's talk about their effectiveness as well.
Look, I think I have had a chance to work alongside a whole range of different non-military professionals, be that in the commercial sector and other parts of the government sector, and most recently had a job on secondment to another part of the Australian government outside of the Department of Defence, where I was part of a non-military team. I was the only military person in that organisation for a couple of years. So I think what I'd say first up is that leadership is, in any context, is consistent, that good leaders, or the leadership and the attributes of leadership are consistent across all environments. Obviously, context is always key for the style of leadership that's most appropriate at the time and place and organisation and environment. I think the things that I really noted, having worked with military civil teams and civilian teams alone, is that the being comfortable in collective decision making and building greater degrees of collaboration. And I think that's something that the military has taken on board in the last decade or so and become far more comfortable inside the organisation. But it's learnt from and taken lessons from the commercial sector and other parts of the government about this idea of collaborative decision making, and ultimately someone is ideally always still responsible for making the final decision, but it's not a unilateral activity. It's a series of collaborative discussions with teams and experts, and that's something that I certainly have taken on board and observed in the really good leaders, is the active listening skills that they display, and empowering others to lead. So that's something I've really noted in civilian workspace that the military has provided some benefits on, is helping others realise the value of being a leader. Sometimes there's people that are in positions in the commercial space or the civil sector, and because their title doesn't have manager or director in it, they're somehow not a leader. But if they adopt the leader, everyone's a leader model, or a leader model, the power they can get from that organisation and from that team, because everyone feels empowered to be a leader in their own right and not just defer to someone else. And again, I think that's something the military does well. It hasn't always talked about it, but a private soldier, the forward scout, back to our basic infantry type model, is a leader. They make decisions. And their section commander and their platoon commander and their company commander could be reacting to the decisions that individual makes in a tactical environment. And that's a really powerful model if we think about it as building a leader model rather than a leader follower. And that's something that I think really good civil organisations actually empower their people to be leaders at all levels. And the other thing I've really noticed and taken away from my experience and exposure to civil leadership teams is how they seek to discover the skills of their team members and draw on those experiences and skills to achieve outcomes. So there might be skills and experiences that have nothing to do with their particular role or current employment, but drawing on those extracurricular skills or experiences and making the effort to discover those, and then think about how you can use them in your current, whatever that current context or environment is really quite powerful, and something I reflect on as our military has changed over the last 2 decades. The average age, for example, at RMC at the Royal Military College Duntroon now, when we went through, Ben, would have been around 21 years of age.
Yep.
Today it's cresting towards 24 or 25. And that doesn't seem like a big difference, but that's another 4 years of life experience that our young officers are going to have and bring to the workforce when they graduate as junior officers. And that, some of the things, that they've done in that relatively small space of time are quite phenomenal. When I was a commanding officer there, I got to meet young aspiring junior officers that had been lawyers in working in NGOs in Africa, had run their own businesses already, had been managers of small, medium enterprises, but decided to now join the army and become a military officer. And the amount of experience, life experience they brought to their officer training and their military profession, really was quite humbling. And as someone who thinks about the future quite a bit for the military organisation, I felt that we were in really good hands, because we were going to have these young officers who, as they progressed in their military profession, brought with them different perspectives, different skills that I didn't have.
I've got to pick up something there, because it just intrigues me. It must be a really surreal experience to go back to Duntroon as a CO. Like, when we were there, we had the then or eventually General Cantwell, and he was a scary guy. I had a lot of respect for him. In fact, I liked him a lot. But geez, he scared me. You're not a scary guy, Mark. I like you.
I don't think I'm a scary guy either. And you're right. The first time you walk, and I hadn't gone back as an instructor to Duntroon. So the first time I walked into the drill wing, the drill sergeant wing, Eric, where all the drill sergeants have their offices. As a cadet, that's a scary place to ever have to go to and ring the bell, as you'd remember, Ben. And that bell's still there, and you still ring it. Or you did when I was the CO there, some 7 years ago now. So it's a bit scary how long that time passes quickly as well. But yeah, it is quite surreal to go back. And every now and again, I'd say to my regimental sergeant major, the senior sergeant, the senior soldier of Duntroon, who I got to say I was so blessed to have an absolutely outstanding regimental sergeant major as my offsider and part of my command team. I learnt so much from him, and it's a highlight of my one of the highlights of my command experience. So I constantly pinched myself when I was going back there. I sought out previous COs and asked for their advice on, what would be the three things, as they reflect on their time there, what would be three things they'd do the same? What would be three things that they'd do differently if they had their time again? And, because I remembered Stu Ellis, who was our first commanding officer, who's now the CEO of, I think, the Austral Asian Emergency Services Association, and has done some amazing things on behalf of our emergency services over the last decade and a half or 2 decades. John Cantwell, they did some really, I thought, great things as a cadet. I actually remembered them, to be honest, which, there's a lot of staff at RMC. You don't, and yes, you'll always remember who the CO's name was, but I remember both of them because they made an impression personally on me, not just because I knew, Lieutenant Colonel SC Ellis AM, I think it was at the time, and same with Colonel Cantwell. And I thought about some of the things they did, and the CO's hour. I don't know if you remember those, where he'd be the closed door and tell us what's really happening, and have that chance to have a one-on-one chat. I adopted that because I thought it was really powerful. I remember as a cadet feeling like I had a chance to be heard. As you know, and I know many of your previous guests have talked about, that ability to hear what others are saying, I think, is a really key attribute of leaders. It's active listening and hearing what your team, your colleagues are saying. That's such a powerful part of leadership, and a really difficult one, because sometimes I think people always expect leaders to have all the answers and to be the one talking. But in fact, it's about listening, because most of your team have the answers already. It's just giving them the confidence to tease it out and think out loud, and really your role is to sort of check that that answer is the right solution for this particular context or environment. And 99% of the time it's giving them the confidence to let them execute, So yeah, that to me was the real amazing thing of being at the Royal Military College and going back there as a CO. It certainly was never on my anticipated jobs list. And, I was changing my daughter's nappy. She was about, a few weeks old when I got a phone call saying, "Hey, you've been selected to be the CO." And I sort of paused mid nappy changing and went, "Have you got the right number?" I'm an Int Corps officer, and they're like, "Yep, that's it, you're in." So yeah, it was very humbling, and certainly one of the life experiences that can never hope to replicate anywhere else.
Mark,
Eric?
Oh, okay, good. Mark, I just wanted to ask, because you mentioned context a couple of times since we started the podcast, so I'll try and do a bit of a derivation of one of the questions I've got here, but I think you'll have an interesting response to this, in that it sounds to me like you've served in multiple different contexts within the military as well as serving outside of the military. Do you believe that the Army has given you enough to deal with those contexts outside of that, or is that something you had to learn when you got into the non-military context? Because I'm asking this definitely as a layperson, not understanding how all of the military structure works, but I would assume, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that the culture of Army is different to the culture of Navy, which is different to the culture of the Air Force. Is that a correct statement?
Yeah, I think definitely the services each have their individual cultures, and the Australian Defence Force has its collective culture with a common set of values. But the services obviously each have their history, which is each quite distinctly proud and based on a range of traditions and experiences that give it strength and give it identity. But in terms of creating the context, I do think the military profession does give you the opportunities to work across and be comfortable in different contexts, and apply and be a leader and a team member of different types of organisations. I've been very fortunate, served as part of the United Nations headquarters, multinational, multi-military civilian, in a third country in East Timor. Very different to my subsequent experience in East Timor, working alongside Australian Army combat arms forces and other regional partners combat arms, but then working in civil military environments, working with lots of non-government organisations and international agencies, and they all bring different strengths, different personalities and different perspectives. And I think the military, the fact that you get those opportunities to work with those types of people and learn from them and observe their different cultures means that you can then bring them back, those positives back to your own organisation and apply them. And that's how we create opportunities for our successors to then go and experience and work in and succeed and thrive in those different contexts, because we bring back those experiences and actually apply some of the things and the ways in which different teams operate, and we learn from them. So without those opportunities to go and work with United Nations and alongside our state and federal government agencies, our regional partners, our allies, you wouldn't get exposed to those different contexts otherwise. So it is the military that gives you the opportunity to work and grow as an individual in different work environments.
Yeah, thank you, Mark.
Interesting segue in many respects, Mark, because I wanted to take up a point you made earlier about the military and civilian leadership context, and that point you made about collaborative leadership. Just drawing on my own experience, and I've been out far longer than I serve, so have been in various sort of senior civilian roles. And one of the critical differences I noticed was being in an executive team or a board meeting and having some pretty robust conversations, and there wasn't any rank involved. We were all sort of similar C-suite or directors, whatever. I always made that distinction that this would not happen in the Army. And I don't remember ever being in a position where, be it when I discharged as a captain, being in ops meetings, whatever, and the CEO made a call, you couldn't say, sorry, sir, I don't agree with you, and I think we're going to need to do it differently. So I guess that the long-winded question I'm trying to make here is, in your role as brigade commander, is there still that appreciation process and that commander's intent that you issue to your unit commanders and those sort of things where they have to implement your intent? However, what if there was an opinion that differed to yours, and how you manage that?
Yeah, look, I think my approach, certainly as a brigade commander, is, it's a team of teams approach. And so the philosophy that I've adopted, and I certainly haven't initiated, I've stolen it from others. General McChrystal's idea of teams and shared awareness, and others who talk about sharing knowledge. That to me is what a team of teams commander or leader does. And quite regularly, my COs come up with ideas and proposals that are different to the way that I would necessarily go about it. But at the end of the day, it's achieving the outcome, and it's their responsibility and their outcome. My job is to facilitate and to ensure they've got the resources to achieve what they need to achieve, and have considered those second and third order effects and strategic implications or contexts. And I refer back to context again. I think one of the 4 mantras that I sort of adopt with my team is to ask them to always see the bigger picture as one of their considerations. So brilliance at the basics is fundamental. Being able to see the bigger picture, working as a team, and relationships matter. Those 4 things, if we do that as a leadership team and as a command team across the entire formation, then we'll be heading in the right direction. And I do give obviously issue intent and guidance, but it's the guidance that's focused on the outcome or the end state. How we achieve that depends on the team that's been tasked to be the lead in achieving that. And really what I ask them to do is come back to me with their plan and confirm the resources they need to achieve it, and make sure that resource usage or allocation is aligned to what we've got available. And so we make adjustments based on that, or if it hasn't fully considered or new information may have come in, it changes the strategic picture or the like. That's what we adjust, but it's not, hey, here's my idea, here's my solution, CO, just go and execute. It's Here's what we need to achieve, here's the resources we've got available to it, here's the time. Come back to me and tell me what how you're going to do it, or what else you might need, so we can either adjust or ask for those additional resources, and then really allow them to get on it and do it. But very rarely in the military does a single organisation solve a single unit go forth and fight or solve a problem on its own. It's about bringing others along. So whilst one unit may be given the lead or be the supported, more often than not, it involves the resources and the collaboration and the cooperation from the other 6 units across the brigade to achieve that outcome. So that's where that team of teams approach comes in, and having shared awareness, means that all of those other organisations are across what that particular CO or that particular unit has the lead on, and so they can be starting to think and do their own consideration about how they're going to use their resources to support that outcome. They know they won't be the lead, but they're certainly going to have skin in the game.
And for context, Mark, I think it's important, Eric, for our listeners to know, how many men and women are under your command in 6th Brigade?
Look, in 6th Brigade, we've got around 2,500 personnel in the brigade, the majority of whom are based in around southeast Queensland, but we do have parts of the organisation in South Australia, Sydney, and small teams scattered across the other states and territories as well, but predominantly a southeast Queensland-based formation.
Yeah, I thought that was important, Eric, because we're not talking about a small office on the corner of Creek and Queen Street, where I happen to be right now. But anyway, we're talking about dispersed locations, a remarkable range of resources and assets, and obviously a remarkable range of people. So context is important there, I think, for what Mark's saying.
Yeah, it's one of the trippy things for someone like me who's doesn't have a military background and is steadily learning what it means for you guys to do your jobs, is that when you start talking about numbers in the thousands of people under your direct command and looking to you for guidance and leadership, that I guess that brings its own set of issues, and you wouldn't be a human being if some of that stuff at times sort of didn't come in your head. All of these people are my responsibility. I know in the corporate sector, as you grow into bigger organizations, that the bigger they are, the more diffused the leadership function is, and so you not abdicate your role, but even if that's the right word, but you pass down the chain responsibility for certain things to get done. And I get a sense that that's the same in the military, but it's not done solo. If you've got command teams and you've got groups of people working together, and it's quite an eye-opening thing for me, because I always assumed that the person in charge, whoever he or she was, just made the final decision and that was it, without much input from other people. But it sounds like, again, from the military context, that you're as up there with current management and leadership practice, in that if you've got a good team of people, you take advice, you listen to what they're saying, and at times you will agree and at times you'll disagree. And I think when you disagree with an idea, it's more about you've brought some experience here. This might have been tried before. It hasn't worked. I know that this will work. And the teachable lesson there is to give people a chance to see the other option or your way of going work and give them something else to put in the toolkit. Because that, I guess, part of the discussions around good leadership into the future. And what I heard you saying before, that you're happy to see an older level of people coming into the military service, or that bring a different life experience in, that stuff's necessarily a good thing as well. Because if like me, you agree, you may not agree, that leadership is about service to others, being able to build up the people around you guarantees continuity of service, and in your case, continuity of service to your country and to your brigade and to the people under your command. Does that make sense to you, Mark?
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. It's all about creating and empowering your leaders. So as a leader of a formation, or a commander of a formation that's both geographically dispersed and multi-disciplined, so range of different capabilities and teams, it's all about setting the culture and setting the vision and empowering your leaders at all levels to get on and lead and make decisions and act in accordance with the overarching guidance, and being cognizant of what that strategic, or seeing the bigger picture constantly, and giving them the resources to be able to do that. And I think that's, I remember being told as a young officer, or recommended as a young officer, delegate until it's uncomfortable, then delegate some more, and then you've probably empowered your subordinates with the level of responsibility and opportunity that they crave, need, and should have at that level, because you've delegated down to the point where you're really uncomfortable. And I think it was a really good bit of advice. It's something I've tried to consistently apply over many years now. But I'm also cognizant and conscious, as I've tried that and worked on it and learnt and thought about it, is that it's also on me, or the leader at the time, to make sure that those teams have been given the opportunity and the resources to be able to execute or undertake those tasks that you're delegating down. So, I think Marquette, I don't know if you've ever had a look at the book, Turn the Ship Around. It's written by a former commander of a US nuclear submarine, and it talks about turning followers into leaders. It's a really good read, well written into little segment chapters with questions to consider at the end. But one of the things he talks about is making sure you've empowered your teams and they have the technical competence, so that when you do delegate and empower them, you're not setting them up for failure, you're setting them up for success. And so it's that combination of the two: delegate till it's uncomfortable, but make sure you've given them the competence and the resources to be able to then execute those tasks that you've delegated down, and so that they actually, you're empowering them to succeed, not setting them up for failure.
Yeah, thank you, Mark.
Couple of final ones for us, if we may. So in your view, and you've covered a lot off today, but in your view, what are the critical leadership capabilities that are required by leaders?
As you know, Ben, there's so many ideas and checklists and books that talk about what are those attributes that successful leaders must have. The things that I think about are building trust and respect, being comfortable in acting, so being prepared to act when you need to act, and listening, because so many times your team will have the answers, and it's drawing them out or giving them the confidence to put that idea or that answer out there, and then giving them the authority to execute, rather than you telling them what that answer is. It's that coaching mentality of, I'm giving you permission, tell me what you're thinking out loud, and then I give you, I reaffirm or I empower you to go forth and do that. And I think they're the things that I try and apply every day, and I constantly am trying to improve every day as a leader, because you all know that in your own professional experiences, when time and resources are tight, it's sometimes easier just to fall back on the leader-doer type model. That won't work, and it's not doesn't build success over the long time, and it doesn't set the organisation up for long-term success. And so it's about building the trust with your team, building respect, being respectful constantly, because that then gives them the confidence to put their ideas out there, think aloud, and then you just empower them to actually act and make sure they've got the resources. That's the key, and the technical competence to be able to then implement what their idea was.
I might pose the final one of our questions here, if that's all right, Ben.
Of course.
Nature versus nurture, Mark. Are leaders born or made?
Look, I've got to say that I think they're made. I know that I was not born a leader. I'm very comfortable that I've learnt and continue to learn every day from my colleagues and peers about leading and about being part of a team and building successful teams and high-performing teams. So, I definitely think it's a learned experience. You must practice it. You must fail. You must make mistakes to learn and be better. I think you've got to be able to, and it's not an instant thing. It's a time-based practice as part of any professional skill. And so while some, I think people have the natural personality attributes that are naturally given to them to help them be effective leaders, that doesn't make them so. It's the application and the effort and the constant learning and the willingness to be part of a team and listen to others and learn from others that makes them into leaders.
On that very topic, Mark, as you are now today, I was, 6-7 months ago, Eric, a guest, and I used the phrase made as well. And over time, I've sort of heard others talk about both and having natural skills. But I think, what did I land on, Eric? 70-30, maybe the 30 is that personality trait.
You keep changing your mind.
No, I've always said 70-30. I'm having to stick to that. Actually, we'll go back to one of the former podcasts and check that I am actually a man of my word there.
We'll check the tapes, mate. From my experience, I'm more convinced now than ever, if I'm being honest, that it's about 80% made. But there's still a percentage of people that you meet in your travels, and it doesn't matter what industry you're in, they're just naturally good at marshalling resources, getting people on board with an idea and being able to sell the idea that you've got the competence to take them to an end state. Those individuals are difficult to find. My hope would be when I get to the end of my career, someone will say to me, "Yep, you actually got there." But I think it's difficult. I think if leadership is anything, in my humble opinion, and I'd love to get your perspective on this, Mark, I think it's a learned craft and skill that you only get better at over time. And I think that if you're fair dinkum about it, you need to accept failure. You need to embrace failure and say, this is going to happen, but it's only going to make me better at what I do. What's your perspective, Mark?
I absolutely agree. I think it is partly it's time-based, but it's got to be effort-based. It's not just being in positions of responsibility over time won't naturally lead you to being a better leader. I think you've got to be willing to fail, willing to learn, willing to listen to others, learn from others, and practice. Practice making decisions through be it training or just day-to-day job, but then reflecting back on those decisions and those actions and saying, okay, so why did I make that action? What else could I have done? Who else could I have spoken to, or what else could I have considered? And who else? What do I know, and who needs to know? And have I told them? Those are three pretty basic questions that help leaders think about their organisation and how their organisations and their teams are working. And it's not just for leaders to ask that; it's about everyone in that team asking the same question, because that builds that shared awareness, shared understanding, common understanding of where the organisation needs to go. And I do believe in the leader model, where if you can encourage and empower everyone in your organisation to see themselves as a leader, then those are the organisations that are going to have enduring success. Because you've talked about it, Eric, and same with you, Ben, about leadership's about service. It's about subordinating yourself to something else, to someone else, or to something else, another organisation. So, this idea of leader means that you've got people that are prepared to subordinate themselves and to serve others. So that to me says you can absolutely have a leader organisation, because everyone is prepared at some point to be subordinated to someone else to serve the rest of the team, and at other times prepared to make decisions, whatever that decision might be, whether it's a small decision or a big one. The individual has considered all the factors, consulted as appropriate, and then been prepared to act, and that's taken that organisation or that team in the next step in the direction that ideally they all wanted to be heading in, and they all knew which way they needed to be heading. So I'm the first to admit that I'm constantly learning. I'm constantly making mistakes and questioning myself. That imposter syndrome is something I'm comfortable and certainly when I got made and appointed Commander 6th Brigade, I sort of looked around and waited for someone to say, oh, sorry, wrong number, wrong person, because you're always questioning whether whether you've got the skills and the knowledge to undertake that responsibility. And you talked about people. It's, do you have the wherewithal to look after all of those people and consider their well-being at all times? But it's an awesome experience, and you get to meet some amazing people and learn from them along the way. I get to meet, catch up with great people like Ben and meet you, Eric, and learn from, people like yourselves who think hard about this and constantly want to learn more about it. And that helps people like me. So thank you for taking the time and making the effort to, run these types of learning environments and learning activities, because they're really, really valuable.
One of the things that we like to finish our podcast on is what are those key takeaways? And what I might ask you to do is a quick favour for me and go over those 4 key leadership points that you had. And I remember the first one was brilliance at the basics, which, if I had a notepad and pen in front of me, I'm going to write all these 4 down, but I might have to watch the podcast to remember them again. But could you take us through those 4?
Yeah, sure. And again, I don't want to take credit for them, because I've stolen them all from other leaders and other people over the years that I've heard them use in their teams. But brilliance at the basics, work as a team, relationships matter, and see the bigger picture. And they're 4 that I use, but I know there's equally a whole range of others out there that would be just as relevant and just as appropriate for different teams. But they're 4 easy ones that I've learnt from others and people that I respect and greatly admire, and it worked for their teams. And so I thought I'd adopt them and apply them as well.
Mark, again, your time is precious, and this has been, in my view, a precious podcast. I've learned a lot myself, what I thought, so I really do appreciate your insights today, and congratulations on a fantastic career. And Eric, any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, just like to thank you for your time, Mark. I know how busy you are, and given the size of the organisation, I'm sure you've got everyone at you to make decisions and to do things on a fairly regular basis, and it doesn't get any easier as the joint gets bigger. So no, I appreciate your time, mate. And this is only going to add to the strength of this podcast as being a resource for people to listen to leaders that have been there and done it, and to take something away, which is the whole point of myself doing this. And with the skills of my co-host here, Mr. Ben Deverson, it's been great, and I appreciate your time, mate. Thanks very much.
Thank you to you both for the opportunity to have a chat with you. I certainly greatly appreciate the opportunity to listen to your podcast, along with a range of others out there that make the effort to provide learning environments for us. And I know that you guys also do this, off your own backs, not as a area of professional interest, not as a occupation. So I really appreciate you making the time and reaching out to people, and I look forward to continuing to listen to your podcast and keep in touch.
No worries, Mark. Thank you. So for those listening, this has been Talking Leadership. We've been speaking to Mark Ascough. Mark, thank you again for your time. And as always, thank you to my co-host, Ben Deverson. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, everyone, for listening, and we'll catch you all on the next podcast.